we have the floor of the mouth, which consists of the tongue, di ba? And the floor of the mouth is the inferior portion. So pag sinabi mong inferior, baba. Okay, superior taas, palate, inferior baba, tongue, floor of the mouth. You have lateral portions or lateral wall sa gilid. You have the cheeks. Posterior portion sa likod, that would be your throat, your oropharynx. And then you have superior sa taas, you have your palate. Okay? Naintindihan po ba? So those are the boundaries of the oral cavity. Lateral, cheeks, superior, palate, posterior, throat, inferior, tongue, okay? Anterior or harap, labi. So that's the walls or the areas of the oral cavity. Nakuha po ba? Do you understand?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, what is the function of the oral cavity? So number one, the main function of it is for mastication. So, aside from mastication, or we all know that the moment we place the food inside our mouth, the digestion already takes place. Okay? So, meron ng start of digestion. So, yung may mga enzymes doon na nasa oral cavity natin that breaks down the food from a simple component, from a major component, pinibreak down nila into a micro component. Diba? Natatandaan ninyo? Or if you have studied your science classes in high school, diba? From carbohydrates, nagbe-break down fructose, diba? Glucose. So all of those, some of the enzymes, no, nagkakaroon na ng start ng digestion sa oral cavity. But yung pinaka-function ng ngipin is for mastication. And that's the chewing of the food mechanically. So pag sinabi mong mechanically, there's a force. When you say chemically naman, there's the presence of enzyme. So, the function of the oral cavity as it houses the teeth, no, it functions for mastication. Then next, you have your throat. Diba? Throat, once you open your mouth, there could be a passage of air. Diba? Kaya nga siya tinawag na oropharynx, yung throat area natin. And then, of course, you have your lips, composed of different muscles. You have your orbicularis oris. You have the muscles of your tongue. So, which enables you to talk or speech. Diba? So, dito, ito yung mga major function ng oral cavity. Gamit panguya, gamit pang intake ng hangin aside from your nasal area, and of course, your speech. So, as a dental technician, you need to understand that when you fabricate a certain denture, di ba, kailangan pasok to sa lahat ng category mo. Dapat komportable ang pasyente sa pagmuya, dapat komportable ang pasyente sa paghinga, at dapat komportable ang pasyente sa pagsasalita. So all these categories could be applied when you are already creating the dentures, removable man, or fixed. Okay? Next. Bakit kailangan pa nating aralin yung oral mucosa? Eh, ang ginagawa lang naman namin ay dentures. Yes, you need to understand oral mucosa, or you need to understand the mucous membrane. Why? Because all of the materials that you place inside the mouth, all of those prostheses, they are in contact with the mucous membrane of the oral cavity. So these are linings, or these are oral cavity. Okay? The oral mucosa or the mucous membrane is lined by a soft, moist tissue. Diba? Pansin ninyo, ang oral cavity natin, laging basa dahil may presence of saliva. Okay? You need to understand that the consistency of the mucosa or the oral mucosa is very helpful when you create removable dentures. Okay, why? Number one, because kailangan hindi masyadong bulky. You need to understand that it is in contact with the surface area. So pagka yung nadikitan mong area ay manipis, pag nagkaroon ng friction, of course, pwede magkaroon ng sinaw, pwede magkaroon ng sugat. But if the area is composed of thick mucosa, kahit magasgas yan, because it's thick, it's keratinized, then hindi siya madaling magsugat. Minsan, nagpo-form pa ng callus or sa Tagalog, kalyo. You understand? So, yun yung importance niya. Yun yung reason why you have to understand the different types of mucosa. Number 1, we have the masticatory mucosa. Ano ba yung masticatory mucosa? From the word itself, kung babalikan natin yung function, mastication, panguya. So, ibig sabihin, these are the mucosa that covers the area that is used for mastication. So, ibig sabihin, ito'y makapal, ito'y keratinized. So, saan may mga area na laging may friction, na laging ginagamit pang kagat? So, number 1, hard palate. Number 2, gingiva. Okay. Diba? Napapansin. Yung mga mahilig kumain ng chichirya, masyado kang mahilig kumain ng chips, you end up finishing the entire bag of chips. Anong problem? Aside from masakit yung jaw mo, kakanguya, masakit na rin yung mucosa. Diba? Parang nasugatan. Diba? It's because some of the areas are not highly keratinized or hindi siya masticatory mucosa. Kaya pag kayong areas na yun, na-submerge or na put into friction every time you eat, no, nagagasgas. So lahat ng mga pangkain, panguya is under masticatory mucosa. Next, specialized mucosa. So specialized mucosa, nandito yung mga panlasa. The papillae that brings the taste. Remember the taste buds. And these are found in the dorsum of the tongue, contains the lingual papilla, and that contains the taste bud. O, yun. Kaya minsan, may mga patient tayo na when they are wearing removable dentures, parang hindi nila malasahan yung pagkain. No, especially if the removable dentures is also covering the palate area. Kasi the distribution of the saliva and then the taste buds, no, hindi malasahan ng pasyente. Kaya di ba never naman tayo nagkaroon ng denture that covers the tongue. Kasi importante na yung mga specialized mucosa hindi matakpan para when the patients eat, malasahan pa rin nila yung pagkain. And the areas naman, no, na hindi kinocoveran ng masticatory mucosa and ng specialized mucosa, ang nagko-cover naman sa kanila is the lining mucosa. And these are the portions that are found in the cheeks. We call the cheeks as the buccal mucosa, and the portion that covers the lips is the labial mucosa. Okay. So, naguguluhan na kami. You have to understand the different terms. Okay? Pag sinabi mo buccal, bakit buccal? Buccal terms for buccinator muscle. Ano ba yung buccinator muscle? Buccinator muscle is the muscles of the cheeks. So any surfaces that is facing the cheeks, you call it as buccal surface. Kaya buccal mucosa. It's the mucosa that covers the cheeks. That's why you call it as buccal. Doc, bakit naman labial? Labial because it pertains to lips. So any surfaces that is facing the lips, you call it as labial. So you have labial surfaces and as well as you have your buccal surfaces. Do you understand? Okay, let's proceed. So as you would notice, you would see that the masticatory mucosa here, it has a very, very, very thick, no, epithelium. So makapal yung keratinized layer niya and makikita natin na very thick siya kasi it's always exposed to friction, laging nagagasgas pag ngumunguya tayo. The specialized mucosa, it also consists of a keratin layer but it consists of taste buds. And then you have your lining mucosas. You have your specialized mucosa, you have your lining mucosa. The lining mucosa, since it's very thin and it is besides a certain blood vessel, such as the floor of the mouth. So tingnan ninyo, look at your mouth in the camera. If you raise your tongue and you look at the floor of the mouth, you would see blood vessels. Diba? Kaya, in case of emergency, if you want a certain medicine to work easily in the body, you place it underneath the tongue. Kasi nandun lahat yung blood vessels. So for example, ang patient mo cannot swallow already because the patient is already unconscious, and then you want to give a patient some medicine kaso wala kang IV, wala kang intramuscular, wala kang intravenous, you could place the tablet sa underneath the tongue. Once it's dissolved, since there are a lot of blood vessels in the area, it could be easily absorbed by the body. It would go to the circulation. Okay? Yun din yung reason kung bakit walang denture na umaabot dun sa floor of the mouth. Wala. Nasaan lang sila? Andun lang sila sa parameters ng ngipin. Yung gilagid sa baba ng ngipin. Wala kang makitang denture that rests on the floor of the mouth. Yung may soft part. It's because if you place a denture there, since there is a blood vessel and it's very, very thin lining mucosa, when you face it with friction, mabilis siyang magsugat. So, if the patient complains, Doc, palaging nagsusugat yung gums ko ay yung mucosa ko, then you have to check your denture in the future. Maybe you need to reduce, masyadong makapal. Maybe may mga structures naman dapat na hindi dapat natatamaan ng denture. Kaso yung gawa mo masyadong makapal, mahaba, then you have to trim it down. Okay? So lagi ninyong tatandaan, no? You are dealing with patients. Hindi nyo nga lang hinaharap yung patients, but you need to understand the structure of the oral cavity. O, di ba? There are lots of dentists sometimes that they do forgot. Susukat na lang, bibigay na lang sa lab. At least you know, di ba? You have an idea. Ay, yung patient may bukol sa palate, or yung patient parang mali yung design na, then you call the dentist. Doc, parang may mali, or pwede po ba ganito, ganyan. So you need to know, di ba? Since you are going to place that material in the patient's mouth. Kaya dapat alam niyo din yung oral cavity. Okay? Okay. So the oral cavity is divided into two major areas. You have your oral vestibule, or in other terms, now you have the vestibular oris, and you have the oral cavity proper. So, Doc, ano yung oral vestibule? Ano naman yung oral cavity proper? So, the oral vestibule is the smallest area. So, meron tayong tinatawag na anti-chamber space. And this is bounded by the cheeks on the side and bounded by the lips and the facial surfaces of the teeth. So, ibig sabihin, from the lips, yung likod ng labi, hanggang sa harapan na portion ng ngipin, hanggang makarating ka sa labial. Labial means facing the lips, buccal surfaces of the teeth, facing the cheeks. So you call that area as oral vestibule. So paano yun, Doc? Hindi ko pa rin gets. You look at yourself in the mirror or in the camera. From the back of your lips up to the front of your teeth, that portion is oral vestibule. So, yung likod ng labi mo, hanggang sa harapan na surface ng ngipin mo, hanggang likod, harapan lang So, meaning, the tooth that is facing the buccal or the cheeks, and then the tooth that is facing the lips. That's the oral vestibule. So, usually, nandyan nakaipit ang denture, di ba? Pag may postiso, dyan nakalagay, nakasusok siya dyan. Pag kumakain tayo, di ba? Minsan pag may sumusok-sok dyan, di ba? Tinatanggal natin. So that space is called as oral vestibule. The space between the front surfaces of the teeth and your cheeks and your lips. Okay? Yun ang oral vestibule. Doc, ano naman yung oral cavity proper? When we talk about oral cavity proper, this is the largest part of the oral cavity. So, yung likod na surfaces ng ngipin that is touching your tongue, both in the upper and both in the lower, hanggang dun sa paglunok mo, you call it as oral cavity proper. Do you understand? Okay, in terms, turuan ko kayo, para ngayon pa lang, hindi na kayo malito. Surfaces of the teeth that is facing, di ba? Itong surface ng teeth na to, that is facing the tongue, di ba, nandito ang dila? You call it as lingual surfaces. Right? The surfaces, look at the screen, the surfaces of the teeth that is facing the palate, yung palatal mo, you call it as palatal surface. Now, on the palatal surface and on the lingual surface of the tooth, hanggang makaabot dun sa throat ninyo, sa oropharynx, bago mo malunok yung pagkain, di ba, ilulunok mo pa lang, yung sa may frenum, yung parang maliit na muscle na when you open your mouth, parang may pendulum or may bell, di ba? Nakita niyo yun when you open your mirror? Or yung namamaga, di ba, tonsillitis, di ba? That's part or that is still a part of your oral cavity proper. Okay? So, very limited lang ang structure sa oral vestibule at napakalaking structure ng oral cavity proper. Do you understand? So, syempre naman, no? Wala naman sigurong denture na abot hanggang dulo. Maggagag yung patient. Diba? So, those are the things that you need to understand. Ano pa? Syempre, hindi nyo dapat pahabain yung removable denture sa taas. Hindi mo dapat siya pahabain hanggang dun sa may portion ng palate na malambot. Kasi, since it's mobile, it's malambot, it's not a good foundation for denture. Malalaglag si denture. Kaya may hangganan kung saan lang pwede ilagay ang denture. You understand? Next. So there are different structures that are found in the oral vestibules. Oral vestibule, again, they are the labial surfaces and surfaces that is facing the lips. Okay? Now, what is fornix vestibule? Fornix vestibule is the junction of the soft tissue meets the bone area, a horseshoe-shaped furrow lined by a mucous membrane within an area of reflection between the roots of the lips, okay, the boundaries of the cheeks, down to the alveolar process or the bone. Okay? Okay. Doc, hindi ko maintindihan yung sinabi mo. Wait lang. Fornix vestibule. Okay. So, saan po ba ang fornix vestibule? Ang fornix vestibule, ito siya. This is the area wherein bago ma-meet yung bone, di ba? There's a bone that holds the tooth. And then dito, puro soft tissues, di ba? You have the lips and then the cheeks. So, bago or yung junction or yung separation, you call it as vestibular fornix. So, going back, the junction of the soft tissue meets the bone area. So, dito, yung junction na yan, you call it as fornix vestibuli or another term is vestibular fornix. Okay? So, reading the books, hindi pinag-iiba-iba. Minsan, nag-iiba yung term, pero iisa lang yung ibig sabihin nun. Okay? Now, meron tayong tinatawag na, tulad nito, you have the mucolabial fold, and then you have the labial vestibule. Dok, ano ba yung labial vestibule? Pag-aralan natin, once you say labial, it is something that is facing the lips. So yung espasyo dito or yung space dito, you call it as labial vestibule. But the space in between the teeth and then the cheeks, since it's facing the cheeks, you call it buccinator, di ba? Buccal, you call it as buccal vestibule. So it's between the cheek area, right? And then you have now your alveolar process. Now the alveolar process is the bone already or the medial boundary of the oral vestibule covered by the mucous membrane. Okay. So, Doc, ang gulo-gulo na, ang dami ng terms, no? So, when you talk about labial vestibule is the space at the back of your lips, no? Up to before you reach the gingiva or the gums that covers the teeth. So, yung space na yan, you call it as labial. Now, the buccal vestibule is the space in between the cheeks and the teeth. So, that's the buccal vestibule. Naintindihan? So, imagine, may lips dito, di ba? May labi dito. And then this is the teeth already. So, the space in front, if there's a lip, you call it as labial vestibule. The spaces between the cheeks and the teeth, you call it as buccal vestibule. Now, the junction, let's say there's still the tissue here. Before you go to the alveolar process or the gums that consist of the bone that holds the tooth, yun yung fornix vestibuli. Yun yung boundary. So, di ba, soft, tapos pag ginanon mo, hindi mo na mahatak kasi naka-attach na siya sa bone. Yung boundaries na yun, you call it as fornix vestibuli. Okay? What else? The upper member, you call it as so the upper member, you call this as maxilla. Okay? You have your maxilla. And then the lower member, you call it as mandible. Okay. So, you need to understand yung maxilla, it holds the upper portion. Okay? And then you have the mandible, which holds the lower member. Okay? Yung maxilla natin, hindi siya gumagalaw. Kahit magsalita ka dyan, hawakan mo yan, hindi ang gumagalaw. It is part of the cranial base. It's part of your facial profile here. Ito. So, yung upper member na yan, hindi ang gumagalaw. So, the only movable member is your jaw. May hinge dito. Okay? Meron ditong joint, no, that allows the movement of your jaw even though it is attached to the maxilla. So the maxilla is fixed and the mandible is mobile. Do you understand? So, ibig sabihin, magaling pa rin ang Diyos, even though you place a denture in the upper, even though there's a pull of gravity kasi pababa, it's okay because the maxilla is not moving. Diba? Hindi siya masyadong gagalaw. Diba? Kasi stable, si denture. Tapos yung palate mo nandun, malaki. So siya yung mag-hold ng denture. Mabait pa rin siya sa lower, even though the lower is moving, nag-move yung jaw mo, hindi naman siya against the gravity. Diba? Kasi nasa baba siya. So even though you move left, right, it's okay. Because yung pull ng gravity pababa, hindi naman malalaglag pa yung denture mo pababa kasi nasa baba na siya. Do you get my point? Diba? So you wear a denture on the lower might be mobile, yung patungan niya gumagalaw man, okay lang. Diba? Kasi nasa baba na siya. Wala nang ilalaglag pa yung denture kasi nasa baba na siya eh. The upper, even though it's in the upper is not moving. It's fixed. Hindi siya gumagalaw. So kahit magsalita-salita ka dyan, your maxilla is still in the same position. Ang gumagalaw na yung ulo. Kaya akala mo gumagalaw yung maxilla. So maxilla is fixed. Mandible is movable. Read? Okay, next. Kita na po yung screen? Not yet. Kita na ba?
Nakikita po.
Sige, going back. Here, you have the mucous membrane. You have your alveolar mucosa. The alveolar mucosa, it is adjacent dun sa vestibular fornix. Okay? Darkened red siya, and it is mobile. So, ano bang meron dito? So, pag sinabi nating alveolar mucosa, it is darker red, color, mobile, smoother, delicate surface texture. So, pagka ganito, naka-attach siya doon sa bone. So, alveolar bone. Okay? Kaya siya tinawag na alveolar mucosa. Okay? Yung gingiva na parts, or gingiva, it is adjacent or malapit naman doon sa neck or doon sa part ng ngipin. So this is the gingiva. Okay, near the tooth. This is very firm. It's immovable. It's thicker. Here on this portion, malapit dun sa bone, you call it as alveolar mucosa. Between the alveolar mucosa and the gingiva, there's a separation or a line which is what we call as mucogingival junction. Okay, Doc, hindi ko makita. Wait lang. Kitaan ko kayo. Nakita po natin?
Yes.
Do you see?
Yes po.
Do you see?
Yes po.
Okay. So this one is the alveolar mucosa. It's very near to your alveolar bone. In this portion, this is your gingiva. It is attached near to your teeth. Right? Between the alveolar mucosa and the gingiva, there's a scallop lining. Kita niyan, nag-iba ng kulay. And that is your mucogingival junction. Okay? O, ito ito, kanina yung mga vestibule, di ba? You have your labial vestibule, and then you have your buccal vestibule. Teeth facing the lips, labial. Teeth facing the cheeks, buccal. So buccal vestibule, labial vestibule. Gets? Do you understand? Intindihan? So yung space of the front teeth towards your lips, it's your labial vestibule. The space between the buccal or yung part ng teeth facing the cheeks, yung space na yan, that's your buccal vestibule. Naintindihan? Do you understand? Naintindihan po? Malinaw? Malinaw?
Yes, Doc.
Okay.
Yes.
Sige. So next, you have the maxillary tuberosity and the maxillary retromolar papilla. A maxillary tuberosity is a rounded, bony prominence distal to the last molar, forming the posterior end of the alveolar process. While the maxillary retromolar papilla is a gingival extension or overgrowth of the gingiva distal to the upper last molar. Sige, pakita ko sa inyo. Maxillary tuberosity. Very prominent ito sa mga patient na edentulous or yung patient na walang ngipin. Maxillary tuberosity, this is it. Ito yan. Importante yan para sa inyo. Why? So this one is a maxillary tuberosity here and here. So para saan siya? Okay. So the maxillary tuberosity, okay, it would hold the denture in time pagka wala ng ngipin. Remember, you have your full denture, gumawa ka postizo. So this bony prominence in the maxillary area, you call it as maxillary tuberosity. Do you understand? So this is the maxillary tuberosity. Wait lang. Next is your retromolar papilla. Retromolar papilla. A retromolar papilla is an extension of your gums or your gingiva. Yan o, yung part ng gingiva na to pababa. So you call it as retromolar papilla from your last tooth, your third molar pababa. And you call it as retromolar papilla. Do you understand? So this one is retromolar papilla. This one is also retromolar papilla. Copy? So retromolar papilla is the gingiva, or gingival extension from your third molar pababa. Okay, so going back, retromolar or maxillary retromolar papilla from here, okay, it's a gingival extension or overgrowth distal to the upper last molar. Doc, ano ba yan? Meron ka na namang bagong terms. Pag sinabing distal, turuan ko kayo, this one is the front of the tooth. Anong tawag dito? middle, nasa gitna. If you move farther away sa middle, papunta dito, you call it as distal. So everything that is away from the midline, you call it distal. Everything that is towards the middle, you call it mesial. Okay? Mesial. So pag sinabi kong distal to the third molar, so this is your third molar. So, distal. Papunta ba siya ng gitna o paalis siya ng gitna? Palikod. When you talk about distal.
Palikod.
Punta po sa likod. Palikod po.
Papunta sa likod. Tama. So, when you hear the term distal, it means towards the back, pagilid, paside. Okay? Pero wag kayong malito ha. There are still other terms that you need to understand. Okay? Again, pag paharap sa labi, you call that surface as
Mesial.
mesial. Paharap sa labi. If the tooth is facing the lips, you call that labial.
Labial.
Okay. If the tooth is facing the cheeks, you call it as
Bakal.
If it's towards the middle, you call it as
Mesial. Ayun po yung towards the middle.
mesial. If it's away the midline or paatras ng midline, you call it as distal. Very good. If it's on the top, sa ceiling, is it superior or inferior?
Superior. Po, superior.
Superior. Ano yung nasa superior ng oral cavity natin? Narinig ko na, starts with the letter P.
Palate.
Palate. So, if the tooth is facing the palate, you call that surface as
Palatal view.
palatal. Okay. If the tooth is facing the tongue, you call it as
Lingual.
lingual. Okay. What do you see at the floor of the mouth? The tongue.
Lining.
Tama.
Lining mucosa.
By the lining mucosa. Okay, what do you call the space in between the cheeks, the lips, and the teeth? So for example, if it's in between the lips and the front surface of the teeth, you call it as what surface? What space? Labial. Labial. Vestibular. Right. But if the space is in the cheek area, between the cheeks. Okay, what do you call the junction of the cheeks bago siya mapunta sa alveolar mucosa? Very good. What do you call the part wherein it is attached to the teeth? Neck of the teeth.
Alveolar.
Gingiva. How about if it's attached to the bone? Mr. Christopher.
Alveolar. Junction.
Alveolar mucosa. The separation of the alveolar mucosa and the gingiva is separated by what scallop material, what scallop part? They call that. It's the mucogingival junction. Okay. So, naiintindihan po? What do you call that bony material found at the distal portion of the third molar? Bony ha, bony. Bone siya. Maxillary
Tuberosity.
Okay. And then the gingiva that is distal to the third molar is a distal extension of the gingiva. You call it as retromolar. Very good. Okay, let's go to our next slide. Okay. So now we have the retromolar pad. Doc, kanina retromolar papilla, ngayon naman retromolar pad. So ano ba yung retromolar pad? The retromolar pad is this one. It is found naman sa third molar or it's a gingival overgrowth naman besides your mandibular third molar. Kung kanina, third molar nagmaxilla, you have your retromolar papilla. Sa baba naman, you have your retromolar pad. The retromolar pad is again very, very important for mandibular dentures. Tingnan nyo. Okay. So in the mandibular or in the retromolar pad, in this area, so imagine wala nang ngipin, and the retromolar pad, you need to extend your denture up to there. Parang yun yung kapit niya. Okay? Kung sa taas, maxillary tuberosity, it's a bone. Sa baba naman, kailangan nakapatong sa retromolar pad yung denture mo. Do you understand? So a retromolar pad is like a overgrowth or found at the distal to the third molar. It's made up of soft tissue. Si maxillary tuberosity kasi, it is near the bone. It's a rounded bony prominence. It's a bone. While the retromolar pad sa baba, sa mandibular area, third molar distal to it, it's made up of soft tissue. Okay? Naintindihan po? You understand? Kung ano yung retromolar pad or isa pa? Nagets na?
Isa pa nga po.
Isa pa. Okay. Si retromolar pad, ito siya. Ay. Si retromolar pad, ito. Mandible to ha, lower. So the retromolar pad is this one. And then sa upper naman is maxillary tuberosity. So ano po yung maxillary tuberosity? Remember, si maxillary tuberosity, siya yung distal sa upper. Sa baba naman, distal sa lower retromolar pad. Do you understand? Nagets na po? Retromolar papilla, distal overgrowth ng gingiva sa maxillary third molar. Sa baba naman, yung tissue or soft tissue below it, so you have your retromolar pad. Do you understand?
Bali ma'am, magkatapat lang po sila.
Oo, magkatapat sila.
Okay
Nasa
po.
taas lang yung isa, nasa baba lang yung isa.
Okay po ma'am, naintindihan na po.
Parehong sa molar po. Parehong sa molar.
Yes. Pareho silang nakikita distal ng huling ngipin. Distal ng third molar. Yung isa lang sa taas, yung isa naman sa baba. Copy? Naintindihan po natin?
Yes po, naintindihan na po.
Okay. Now, next. What do you mean by frenum and what do you mean by frenulum? Isa lang yan. Frenum, these are muscle attachments. Ito yan. These are soft tissues or folds of tissues that attach your lips to the teeth. So, yan. Pakita ko sa inyo para mas kita. And this is an example of frenum. Ayan. So, yan yung frenum. Okay? Naintindihan po? So, this is an example of frenum. Sa tongue naman, may frenum din. Ayan. Okay? Nakikita po? Do you see?
Yes po.
So, there's a frenum. And then, there's a frenum here in the lips. Copy? Okay. Now, Doc, bakit dun sa slide ang daming pangalan? We have the labial frenum, which is here sa lips. Yan yon, labial frenum. There's also buccal frenum, a frenum found in the buccal areas. And then, there's also lower labial frenum. Meron din dito sa baba. And there's also lower buccal frenum sa baba. So, in total, how many buccal frenum? There are 4. Dalawang buccal frenum sa taas, dalawang buccal frenum sa baba, and then there are 2 labial frenums. Do you understand?
Yes po.
Okay. Now, with this type of knowledge, you know that the frenum are very strong. Gumagalaw sila because it attaches the lips to the near the alveolar mucosa or dun sa may fornix vestibuli. So it would give you the knowledge that when you create a certain denture, you have to relieve the frenum. Kailangan hindi matamaan ng denture yung frenum. So ang shape ng denture, pag ganun. Ito ang reason kung bakit ganito ang complete denture. The complete denture needs to relieve the presence of the 2 labial frenum. Frenum sa taas, frenum sa baba, buccal frenum here, buccal frenum here, buccal frenum here, buccal frenum here. Ito mas malinaw to. Di ba? May frenum dito, kaya iniwasan niya. May frenum dito, kaya iniwasan niya. May frenum dito, kaya iniwasan niya. May frenum to, may frenum yan. Alam niyo tong surfaces na to, kung saan to nakaland? Yan yung tinatawag ninyo na labial vestibule, buccal vestibule. So, kaya importante na alam niyo yung vestibule. Alam niyo dapat kung saan yung hangganan. So, bakit kaya ni-relieve yung mga frenum? Why do you think? Anyone?
Para po hindi ma-damage.
Aside from di ma-damage,
Para hindi masugatan.
hindi masugatan, hindi ma-damage, tama. When you talk,
Para po, fit
gumagalaw
talaga po.
yung
Para po comfortable pag nilagay na po yung dentures.
Yes, isa pa yun. Try to talk right now. When you are talking right now, do you think your frenum is moving?
Yes po.
Yun.
Kasi soft tissue lang po kasi siya.
Oo. So, imagine ninyo, if you place the denture on top of a moving frenum, what would happen? Malalaglag. Gagalaw. Kaya, first thing, you need to place the denture on a structure that is not moving. So, if the structure is moving, you have to relieve or remove it away from the frenum. Do you understand? Copy?
Yes,
Yun. So, ibig sabihin, lahat ng may mga frenum, iiwasan. Kaya dapat alam ninyo that there are 2 labial frenums and there are 4 buccal frenums. 2 sa taas, 2 sa baba. So, in total, how many frenums do we have?
6.
6 po.
So, how many labial frenums do we have?
2 po.
How many buccal frenums?
4 po.
4 po. Very good. Naintindihan na? Copy?
Copy po, ma'am. Copy po.
Sige. Next is what do we call as fauces. These fauces are the opening of your throat. These are known as the posterior boundary. Again, why does it called as a posterior boundary? It is found where?
Back.
Sa likod. Okay. Why do you think that is the most difficult area to examine? Bakit mahirap siyang i-examine? Why do you think?
Po, nasa likod po siya.
Nasa
Malapit siya sa throat.
Kasi po malayo. Malalim.
Malalim? Ano pa?
Masyadong.
Sensitive.
Very sensitive. So usually, ang problem naming mga dentist when we do impression, Di ba alam niyo, yung nakita nyo? I know some of you, may mga parents na or meron kayong kamag-anak na na ano, dentist or technician. Bago makapunta yung sukat sa inyo, mag-i-impression kami. And yung material na yon, pag na-reach na yung process or yung sa may kahit nga sa palate, naggagag. So aside from it's very far, madilim, di mo makita without the light, very inaccessible, it's also very sensitive. Okay? Okay, going back. So when you talk about fauces, they are openings of the throat that are found in the posterior boundary, so sa likod. So there are, what do we call, or there are different parts or different types of fauces. Pero una natin kailangan malaman, we have what do we call as the pterygomandibular raphe. So what's a pterygomandibular raphe? It's a tendinous band fold of the mucous membrane from the hamulus of the maxilla connecting to your retromolar pad. So it's a fold of tissues connecting maxilla and mandible. So kanina, there's a gingival overgrowth, di ba? And then here, there's a retromolar pad, and sa taas, you have retromolar papilla. So those folds that connects the retromolar papilla and the retromolar pad, you call it as a pterygomandibular raphe. Okay? So, para mapagdugtong sila. Kasi kanina, retromolar papilla, retromolar pad, for you to combine them, you have the pterygomandibular raphe. Here, the bell-shaped material here, the bell-shaped organ here is the palatine uvula. It's a bell-shaped tissue found at the midline. It's a downward projection of the soft palate. It's very mobile. It helps oronasal in swallowing. Okay? Now, the opening or the fauces, there are two types. You have your palatopharyngeal fold and you have also your palatoglossal fold. Okay, so meron tayong anterior pillar of fauces. You have your palatoglossal. Okay, it's a fold of tissue attaching the soft palate to the base of the tongue. Dito nakikita yung mga tonsils malapit. You have your palatine tonsils, the lymphoid tissue and follicles, and they have also the lingual tonsils that is found naman at the base of your tongue. So meron tayong anterior pillar of fauces and posterior pillar of fauces. The posterior pillar of fauces is called as your palatoglossus or palatopharyngeal fold. The palatopharyngeal fold, the fold of tissues connecting the soft palate along the lateral pharyngeal wall. So anong pinagkaiba ni palatopharyngeal and ni palatoglossus? When you hear the term glossus, it means tongue. So if it is a combination of palatoglossus, a while ago I taught you that palatal means palate. So it means palatoglossus is the fauces of combination of the palate and the tongue. So it's palatoglossus or glossopalatine arc. So pinag-combine si tongue and pinag-combine si palate. So yun naman yung maganda when you are studying medical books, dental books. It is usually a combination of the two structures that are combined together, tapos kung anong structure yon. Kaya pag sinabi mong glossopalatine arc or palatoglossal arc or palatoglossal fold, yung fold na to ay combination ng palate at ng tongue. Kasi glossus is for the tongue, palate is or palatal is for the palate. So kaya siya tinawag na anterior pillar kasi nasa harapan siya. So it's a fold that is a combination of the palate and the tongue. So this fold is called as anterior pillar of fauces, palatoglossus, and glossopalatine. Ang dami niyang pangalan, no? Tatlo. Now, kasama niya is yung lingual and palatine tonsils. So lahat yan nakikita sa posterior wall. Doc, ano naman yung posterior pillar of fauces? Pag sinabi mong posterior pillar of fauces, pakinggan mo, it's palatopharyngeal. Pag sinabi mong palatopharyngeal, ibig sabihin malapit siya or pinag-combine na palate and pinag-combine na pharynx. Ano ba ang mas posterior? Dila or pharynx? Siyempre, pharynx. Kaya siya tinawag na posterior pillar of fauces. Kasi pinagdugtong or this is a tissue or a fauces that combines the soft tissue of the palate down to the lateral walls of the pharynx. Okay? Naintindihan po? Do you understand the terms? Or magulo? Meron tayong anterior pillar of fauces and meron tayong posterior pillar of fauces. Pag sinabi mong anterior pillar of fauces, it is also known as your palatoglossus or glossopalatine arc. Glossopalatine, palatoglossus. When you hear the term glossus, it means tongue. Okay? Tongue. When you hear the term palato or palatal, it means your palate. So, it's the fauces or arco or opening that is a combination of your palate, your soft palate, and your tongue. Anterior pillar. Posterior pillar, mas nasa likod, it's the combination of your palatopharynx. So it's a combination of your pharynx and your palate. Palatopharyngeal arc. Diba? So mas likod siya kasi mas likod naman talaga si pharynx. Kaya siya tinawag na posterior pillar of fauces. Okay, Doc, hindi ko ma-visualize. Ang hirap intindihin, di ba? Yan. So when you look at the photo, you would understand here, this is your palatoglossal. Palatoglossal is the combination of your palate and your tongue. And you would see in the palatoglossal arc, the lingual tonsils and the palatine tonsils. At the very most back, which is your posterior pharyngeal arc, it's a combination of what? It's a combination of the pharyngeal wall and the palate. That's why you call it as palatopharyngeal arc. Diba? Posterior fauces. Kasi nasa likod. So you call this as a palatopharyngeal arc and the posterior pillar of fauces kasi nasa likod. And then you call this one as the palatoglossal arc which is nasa anterior. That's why you call it as anterior pillar of fauces. And this one is your uvula. Copy? Naintindihan po? Okay. Kaya pa? Malapit na. Malapit na mag-9. Konti na lang. Alam ko yung iba sa inyo sa
Ang dami po
bawah.
palang terms yan, sir. Ay, ma'am.
Marami talaga. Wala pa tayo sa ngipin. Okay? Kaya hindi din siya maganda na yung 1 to 5 yung lecture ninyo. Wala